Hey guys, it's Leslie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Leslie and I'm so excited that you're here today. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how I've been doing postpartum. I'm officially 2 months postpartum and I just wanted to give myself some time to kind of just gather my thoughts on how I've been doing and just kind of let postpartum settle in before I make this video. And because I'm already 2 months postpartum, I feel like I can actually say how I've been doing and kind of just reflect back on delivery, the birth, coming home, adjusting, and all that fun stuff. So if you guys want to hear about how my postpartum journey has been going, then please keep on watching. So before I get started, I am going to be talking about references to the birth of my son, my first child, and comparing it to the birth of my daughter, my second child. And I do have 2 videos on those separately on the birth of them. So if you guys want to know a little bit of more information in regarding those births and those stories, then you can go ahead and find them on my channel. But overall, to answer the question, how is my postpartum going? And to answer that question, I can confidently say that I have been doing really well, much more positive than last postpartum. I am just so thankful for how this postpartum journey has been going. So let's take it back to when I was in the delivery room with my son. Unfortunately, there was a complication with my son and his heart rate when I was in the delivery room, and there was a point in which his heart rate got really low, and it scared us. It scared me, my husband, my mom. There was a situation where the nurses and the doctors, and I say nurses and doctors because there were multiple staff members that rushed into my delivery room and were trying to handle the situation to try and get my son's heart rate to go back up and not be so dangerously low as it was. And for that situation and for that complication that was going on, that triggered for me to have postpartum depression and anxiety, because the doctors and nurses came in and were just being hands-on automatically to try and get my son's heart rate up. It wasn't really in my control of where I can say anything, or they were really able to explain what was happening right in that moment of that situation. Just the staff coming in, rushing, the room just being filled with crazy emotions. There were fast actions happening. That alone triggered my postpartum depression and anxiety. And so that fact alone was the biggest part for why last postpartum was so negative. And it took me about 6 months of postpartum for me to cope, reflect, and kind of get out of that negative rabbit hole that I was in. Pretty much in shorter term, I was literally surviving last postpartum, and this postpartum I'm living. I'm confidently living this postpartum. Now I do not have or show any signs of postpartum depression or anxiety. And even after reflecting back, watching the videos, talking about the delivery over with my husband, answering those questions that the doctors ask you in the 6 weeks postpartum questionnaire, nothing is making me feel negative in regarding my daughter's birth or postpartum. Second, last postpartum, I got the epidural, and because of my son's situation of his heart rate dropping, I had a couple of things happening to me in my cooter area, and I feel because of things just occurring down there, and because I was not feeling it because of the epidural in the moment. I had no pain, I couldn't feel anything, so it was just, I knew that things were happening, I just couldn't feel them. And it wasn't until afterwards that I came home that I started to feel everything. And it took me a good time period for me to feel better, like not feel the pain, not feel the soreness, be able to like thoroughly clean myself, and to be okay taking a shower, and to be okay using the bathroom. And so just healing in general was a lot longer, as opposed to this postpartum. During the birth of my daughter, I did not have epidural, I did not have any medication. And so when I pushed her out, I felt everything. And afterwards, yes, there was still pain and discomfort and the bleeding, but my cooter itself was able to recover a lot faster. It wasn't as raw. I was able to shower in the hospital after having my daughter, which I was not able to do last postpartum. I did not shower until I came home last postpartum, as opposed to this time, I actually showered in the hospital. Third, I honestly feel the staff had a part to do in just reflecting back on the labor and birth of my children. And just the staff alone really do have an impact on me, and while I have my stay at the hospital. And unfortunately, I did have some nurses and a doctor that were negative and really stood out to me, and honestly kind of overshadowed the good nurses and the good doctors that I had. And it sucks because it only takes like one mean person to kind of just ruin everything else, or kind of just blur everything else. And so while I was in labor, I had a really rude nurse, and just she had an attitude, she was rude. Even the way how she was speaking with my support team, she just wasn't supportive of me and what I wanted, such as going into labor with my son. I was really praising for me to not get an epidural, but to that nurse, she felt that she could give her 2 cents and tell me that I was gonna need the epidural, and pretty much trying to convince me to change my mind. And also, the doctor that made me feel bad as a mom was once we were in the postpartum room, and I was having difficulty getting my son to latch for breastfeeding, and we resorted to giving my son formula while in the hospital. The pediatrician, he came in and he said something along the lines of, we were poisoning our son's stomach because we were introducing formula to him that fresh from the womb. Me and my husband, we were just so taken aback that the pediatrician had said that. On top of him already making that negative comment, I was already feeling bad about myself as a mother, that I was having difficulty getting my son latching by myself and being able to breastfeed him as much as I would have loved to when he was fresh out of the womb. So just those two staff members really did play a role in me going down that negative rabbit hole. As opposed to this postpartum, the staff, nurses and doctors, they were just beyond phenomenal. They were honestly so amazing. They were just constantly telling me positive things, supporting me, double checking things with me, making sure that I understood things that I was unfamiliar with. I was comfortable asking them questions. Just overall, they were amazing. And that went for during labor and while I was postpartum in the hospital. And so the staff really did play a role in how postpartum goes. Number 3 is the breastfeeding and getting my kids to latch. So as I mentioned already a little bit, my son, he had difficulty latching when I was trying to latch him myself. And so it was weird because he was able to latch when I had staff assistants, but that can only go for so long because that was only during the hospital stay or when we would go to his 3-day-old baby appointment checkup. Other than that, I was at home with my husband and we were having difficulty getting my son to latch. And so that was honestly a really big surprise to me of how difficult I had it in getting my son to latch. And because our son was still hungry after trying to breastfeed from me, we felt that we had to give him formula to make sure that our son was eating good, and that was honestly more important, was making sure that our son was being fed. And so my husband and I decided to give our son formula while in the hospital, and that resorted to our son having breast milk and formula once he came home. And so even when we came home, I was breastfeeding as much as I could. I was pumping as best as I could, but my milk production was not as much as I would have hoped it to be. And like I said, we had to continue the formula because we felt that my son was still hungry even after just getting the breast milk. And as for breastfeeding my daughter, I was able to latch her on right away, right after birth. My milk production has been enough for her ever since she was born. I have a much better understanding and I'm much more educated on breastfeeding, the positions, the do's and don'ts, how to make sure that the baby has a proper latch, what is a incorrect latch, the feeding cues, how to know when your baby is full. So just all of those things, I'm much more informed and educated about them. And so that has a factor in it. And also my milk production, like I said, is thriving. I'm able to give my daughter enough milk where she's satisfied. I am so thankful to say that I have not given my daughter a single ounce of formula. I've been giving her solely my breast milk. And it's funny because we've given my daughter breast milk in the bottle, and she honestly prefers to drink on tap as opposed to my son, because I had a difficult time getting him to latch. He preferred the bottle. Number 4 is how I viewed the delivery of my kids after coming home. After I had my son, because of his heart rate dropping and the whole scenario of the staff coming in and just that really scary moment that we had, I became fixated and associated his whole birth and being in the hospital with that situation. So I just unfortunately focused on the negative things that came with the labor and birth of my son. And once I came home that day, I cried, I kid you not, like 3 times. In-laws had came over, and just trying to talk to them and tell them how the birth went, I cried. I couldn't get through talking about his birth without crying. And it took me a long time to finally be able to talk about the labor and birth of my son without crying, without getting emotional, and without associating it with negative things. And because of that, I just became so hyper fixated on those emotions. Thus, it led me to having postpartum depression and anxiety. as opposed to this postpartum. I didn't have any complications while I was in the labor room and giving birth to my daughter. Unfortunately, though, there was also a scare that we had with her, but that was after she was born, and that was her temperature and her oxygen were getting low. And so with her, there was a situation where there was a nurse and a doctor checking on her, trying to get her oxygen back up, her temperature back up, and just being with her for a cool minute, just examining her. She also had to go into a separate room with other nurses, and they had to do some work on her. They had to do an x-ray on her. They had to do a blood check on her. They had to insert an IV in her, and just that alone also was very scary. And me and my husband were in that room with her when they were doing all of these checks on her. But I think because this time we were able to get explanations and be fully aware, the both of us, of what was happening, made me not be hyper fixated on those negative, unfortunate situations, and just stay remembering the positive side of things of my daughter's birth. Number 5 is the mindset that I had going into birth. What I mean by that is the mindset that I had going into birth with my son, it honestly wasn't prepared. I tried to prepare myself mentally and emotionally, but looking back, I honestly did not. All I did was just try and prepare myself physically, because I wasn't mentally or emotionally trained or prepared for that. I ended up caving into the epidural because during labor it's painful, it hurts, and I caved into those negative feelings and those negative emotions, and thus that's why I got the epidural, because I didn't prepare myself mentally and emotionally for how labor was going to be. As opposed to this time around, I actually did prepare myself in all 3 factors: mentally, emotionally, and physically. I was much more on it for the physical aspect, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, I prepared myself physically by doing walks, doing my yoga ball, stretching, but emotionally and physically, what I did this time around is I watched YouTube videos, I watched many TikToks, and I was able to train my mind and to be strong for this birth. And so while I was in labor with my daughter, I was able to use all of that training and practicing that I had done while I was still pregnant and use it in the hospital room. And shout out to Bridget Taylor. She is super phenomenal, and her stuff is what I really paid attention to, really loved, and her information is what I kept rewatching and just taking a deep dive into her stuff. And even now, after postpartum, I still have all of that information that she shares in my mind today. Number 6 is the physical expectations that I have for myself. After having my son, I honestly feel like, in a way, I was pressured to start wearing my faja, get my stomach to start flattening out, and to not get that mommy pooch. And I think I gave myself only a couple days after coming home from the hospital of not wearing the faja. And once I hit to a certain days of postpartum, I put on the faja, and I believe I wore it for the first 3 months straight after having my son. Honestly, I think I even wore it overnight a couple times, because I was fixated on slimming my stomach back down and to get rid of the mommy pooch, and pretty much just feeling from the outside voices that I had to wear the faja. I had to start working on tightening my stomach and preventing from me having the mommy pooch even in postpartum. And so with that, I kind of just became automatic with it. I would wake up, put on my faja, and I would wear it all day long until it was time for me to shower, and I would take it off. As opposed to now, I have worn my faja, but I honestly feel like I've only worn it not even as many times as I can count on one hand. And I know for sure I did not wear it overnight. And it wasn't even a full day, honestly. It was just for a good portion of the day, but it wasn't from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, aka which is right before I showered. And so now I'm not listening to the outside voices of the influence of having to wear the faja right away, wearing it every day, wearing it from morning to night, and being told that the mommy pooch is bad, or it's not good to have the mommy pooch even after postpartum. Pretty much just accepting how my body looks the way how it is. I'm able to look at myself and be confident and proud with the body that I have. Number 7 is the financial status that we have as a family is different in both postpartums. After having my son, my husband and I were already living on our own in a 1-bedroom, and before my son even turned 1 month old, we had to move out of there and go move in with my parents and my siblings. We had to make that move because we couldn't afford to keep living on our own. Myself and my husband were really stressed about money and just trying to figure out how were we going to keep living in our 1-bedroom apartment while also making sure that our son had everything that he needed, that obviously we had to pay for ourselves. That was just another reason for why I was so stressed, anxious, worried, and negative postpartum being at home. And my husband and I had just felt that we were really struggling and failing in a way for our son that we just brought home because we couldn't afford and still keep living in our 1-bedroom apartment. As opposed to now, we are so blessed to welcome our daughter in this house that we get to call a home. We are now in a 3-bedroom, and thankfully we are able to keep living here and to keep calling this house a home for our family. And our financial situation is much better compared to then. Obviously, we are not rich, we're not millionaires, we're not rolling around in money, but we are able to provide our daughter the things that she needs that we need to pay out of pocket for. And number 8 is the type of relationship that I have with my husband. Since last postpartum, I had postpartum depression and anxiety. I was constantly in my head and just stuck in literally gray, raining clouds, being my whole mood and my whole emotions 24/7. And because that's how I was, now looking back, I can tell that it was hard for my husband to try and have a good relationship with me because I was so hyper fixed. I was just so deep in that rabbit hole. I know he was trying his absolute best to help me get better and to try and get me on the other side and be positive. And most of the time, our conversations that we had, I would be crying. I would be venting to him, as opposed to now, because I'm much happier and more positive. It's a lot easier having conversations with my husband. It's only been a few times where we've had a conversation and I've cried, but our relationship and our bond within itself is a lot stronger. It's a lot more confident. We're able to have conversations, and honestly, now that our family has grown to the size of 4, I love him very much more, and I know his love for me has grown even more. But I'm gonna end the video here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I kind of wanted to just come on here and talk to you guys as if you're like my therapist or my sister or my friend or something, that I can just talk and share my journey with you guys, and to kind of just validate other postpartum mommies, other women out there, and be real and raw with you guys, because of course things can be different behind closed doors, and that's exactly how it is for speaking myself. And that's speaking for myself because after sharing with you guys and comparing, I have had 2 different birth experiences, 2 different postpartums, and so that's why I preach that every birth is different, every postpartum is different, every woman is different. After having 2 different experiences, I want to pretty much validate every and all experiences. And so I'm hoping, even if it's just one person, that you feel heard, understood, you feel like you're not alone, because you most definitely are not. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to keep supporting me on my channel here and on my journey. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next video.